here tonight. So please enjoy Hero.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, good evening. Oh, it's really loud. Much quieter, I don't have to shout. Good evening. Welcome to the very first Muddy Stilettos Literary Salon. I'm Hero, I'm the founder and the editor of Muddy Stilettos, and if you're in the audience thinking, what the hell is Muddy Stilettos? Basically, we're the biggest, one of the UK's biggest women's lifestyle platforms, which basically means we've got 300,000 subscribers, we're over 18 counties. But the thing that all of these editors do in all the different counties is we try to really help you make the most of where you live. So I write in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. We cover pubs, hotels, restaurants, we go and look at schools, anything that will really sort of help improve your free time. But it did all start in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. I only live in Haddenham down the road. So it's a real thrill, actually, to be in Tame for our very first live event. And thank you very much to the Tame Arts and Literature Festival for having us. So you will know already, we've got an absolutely stonking lineup of authors. I'm really, really proud of it. But before we get started, I just wanted to tell you very briefly, because obviously there are 5 authors, there's a lot to get through tonight, how it's going to go. So we're going to have, it's a sort of fiction first half, about 45 minutes talking to 2 of our authors. Then it's a sort of 15-minute break, bit of champers, bit of gin. If you're driving, sorry about that, but there's elderflower pressé. And then it's going to be non-fiction, sort of memoir-y kind of stuff. But please do ask questions. And there's nothing more lovely than for an author than sitting talking about their book and then actually getting some feedback from the audience. So don't be scared. Just put your hand up and we'll do our very best to accommodate your answers. And then, obviously, after that, what else was I going to say, Lizzie? I can't remember. Oh, yes, actually, at the end, well, we've already said it. We're going to do book signings, and then we'll be around. Come up and chat to the authors. They'd love to chat to you. I'm going to be right there in the vat of champagne at the end. If anybody wants to come up and say hello as well, we'd all be really pleased to see you too. So I hope you have a wonderful night. And if you could give a massive round of applause and a big muddy whoop to our fantastic authors of the evening. Thank you so much. Shall I sit there? Oh, so welcome everybody. Got a beautiful couch going on here. Somebody just said it was a bit like loose women. Oh. I don't know which one of us is Jordan. Right. So let me introduce all the authors, and then we can get started. So first of all, Tasmina Perry, Sunday Times best-selling author. She's just published her 12th novel, The Pool House, and writes big, sexy page-turners about glamorous women leading glamorous lives just like us. Has been compared to Jilly Cooper, no less, which I read all of Jilly Cooper's. I mean, respect to you, yeah. Elizabeth Heathcote is the associate editor of Psychology magazine. Her debut novel, Undertow, a domestic noir thriller, was published last year. Alexandra Hemingsley, accomplished ghostwriter, recently co-authoring Judy Murray's autobiography, but has also published Leap In, her own memoir about learning to swim this year. And she is here tonight with her entourage, her 5-month-old baby, Linus.
Apologies in advance.
Where is Linus? We've got Sasha over there. If you love fashion blogs, you will know Sasha already. I'm a massive fan. In fact, one of the main reasons I started to blog, actually. She's one of the very first successful bloggers, launched her site Liberty London Girl a decade ago. And she's since published a cookbook, Friends, Food, Family, and writes about everything from fashion to recipes to motoring, and runs a digital consultancy advising major brands, and is currently working on her 2nd book. And finally, but not least, Clover. Clover is a local lass based in the Vale of the White Horse. Her heart-rending memoir, The Wild Other, was published to critical acclaim early this year and unpicks the aftermath of her mother's catastrophic horse riding accident. And finally, to my right, otherwise known as Jordan, Kerry Potter, associate editor and books editor on Muddy Stilettos, but also a massively successful national journalist in her own right, working for all the glossies and the broadsheets as well. So Kerry's going to be interviewing the authors with me tonight, and is going to kick off proceedings, actually. She's going to be talking to Tasmina, so over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Hero. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, Tasmina.
Hello.
Hi. So we're here to talk about your 12th novel, which, do you want to hold it up, The Pool House? This is set in the kind of glitzy, exclusive world of the Hamptons in upstate New York, isn't it? And it's about a group of wealthy New Yorkers who have a weekend house share in the Hamptons. And it's all very glamorous and very glitzy, and they have amazing parties. But beneath the surface of it all, there's lots of secrets and intrigue and darkness going on. As the blurb of the book puts it, when you're invited to spend summer in the Hamptons with a group of new friends, you agree, who wouldn't? But then you realise you're taking the place of another woman, a woman who died in mysterious circumstances just the summer before. Your housemates tell you her death was an accident, but which one of them has something to hide? So it's a great premise. So do you want to read a little bit from the book so we get a sense of your style, Tammy?
Right, I'll give you a quick pressé of what's happened before. So basically, Jen, who's our heroine, has just landed this fabulous house share in the Hamptons, and she's just realised, because her husband did a bit of a naughty and didn't tell her actually that they were taking the place of a dead person in this house share. So she's just found out, and she's not very happy with her husband at all. So yeah, I'll read out a little chapter, a little paragraph where she finds out. So tell me about her, she said. Nat, he's the naughty husband, gave a small sigh. She's a bit younger than us, a yoga teacher or something like that. David Holliday, her husband, was a lecturer at Columbia. It was their only summer at the beach house, he shrugged. That's all I know. Jem paused, trying to picture them, David and Alice, on their first night at the house. She imagined them sitting by the fire just as she and Nat had done that evening, chatting, laughing, dreaming about their plans for the summer, and felt an enormous wave of sadness. Does it really not bother you, she asked, being here, sleeping in her bed? Nat looked down at his hands before glancing back. I probably won't be hanging around the pool any longer than I have to. But think what it must be like for Angela and the others. Of course, it's easier for me. I wasn't here, but they were. Can you imagine? Jem closed her eyes, exhaustion taking over. She didn't want to think about it, not now and probably not ever. Perhaps that was the only way to deal with it, put it out of your mind. Nat was right. It must be tough for Alice's friends to be back here. And if they could stand it, she should be able to as well. I'm going to take a bath, she said, walking into the ensuite and splashing water onto her face. She closed the door, turned on the taps, and sat on the edge of the bath, listening to it slowly fill. As the water rose, she touched it with her fingers, hot, just hot enough to stand. She slipped off her clothes, feeling the cool breeze from the open window brush against her bare skin. This was, excuse me, this was usually a favourite part of the day, slipping into the water and feeling her whole body relax, but tonight she could hear the boom of the ocean, the $20 million soundtrack that came with the house. For a second, she wondered how many people would love to be in a place right now, at the start of summer, in the Hamptons, in one of the most chic houses on Ocean Road. It was amazing. The house was amazing. Her life was amazing. But as she slipped down into the water, letting it rise up to her chin, all she could think about was the swimming pool outside, a plate of glimmering water in the night sky, and Alice Holliday's body floating lifelessly in the middle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so.
Thank you, Tammy. There's always a very evocative sense of place in your novels, and I know that it's very important to you to travel to places. I mean, it's a tough gig, isn't it?
It's a gig, yeah.
But I presume you did that with the Hamptons as well, did you? You always go to that place, and why do you do that?
Well, actually, I've had some friends who moved to New York, and often people say, where do you get your ideas from? And it's actually by keeping your ears open and listening to people's life and what happens to them. Friends went over to New York, and they were telling me about how, I just thought, everybody summers in the Hamptons, you can bowl up, get a sort of a house there, and that was the end of it. And they're like, no, the Hamptons is so prestigious, it literally costs, for a big house, about $250,000 for the summer. That's how much. You thought London prices were bad. So I'm like, how would you do it? And they're like, well, literally, you just pile as many people in as you can, and you all sort of take a share in this house share. So that's what got me thinking about, you're basically having this dream summer, but you really don't know who you're sharing it with, really. And then I said to my husband, John, it's tough work, but we're going to have to go to the Hamptons. But sadly, we didn't have $250,000 for a house share. So I said, do you know what? I'm going to get on Airbnb and see what I can find. So I went on Airbnb, and I'm like, I found somewhere. And John's like, that's too good to be true. So we turned up, we got a flight to New York, and again, I didn't realise that nobody, you know, everybody drives, and we turned up with our rucksacks, you know, and we're walking from the station, and we turned up at this fabulous house, and we were basically in the, almost in the converted garage, basically, and the house was owned by a model and a surfer, and they were absolutely fabulous, and they turned up and they went, "Where's your car?" And I was like, "Oh no, we you know, we're here with our rucksacks and our train ticket." And they were so appalled.
Yeah.
They felt so sorry for us. They said, "You know what, just have our car for the month." Oh. And they were so lovely. And actually, again, in the Hamptons, it's a really strange place because it's incredibly beautiful, but the whole place is designed to keep people out. It's quite exclusive. And so even to go to the beach, you need all these beach passes. But we had this car with all these beach passes. And so, like, literally, so it was literally the best. It was the best Airbnb.
Do you have to go somewhere to write about it?
Well, you could. I mean, I was reading the E.L. James, who wrote 50 Shades of Grey. She actually wrote about Seattle without ever having been there, and she just Google mapped it and stuff. I insist I have to go.
I don't
like to think
blame
it
you.
makes it authentic.
I think so. I mean, because you're 12 books in now, aren't you? You know, how do you come up with new ideas and what inspires you? How does that process work?
Again, it's back to what I said about just, I used to be a journalist for many years, like lots of us on the panel, and I think one of the things you do as a journalist is you keep your ears open all the time. So it's generally from people I meet. So, you know, this is actually my third career. So before I was a journalist, I was a lawyer. So my friend who I was at law school with, he's now a media lawyer, and he does all the injunctions, like keeping all, you know, so I'll literally go to a barbecue and he'll be like, you know, will you just look after the sausages for a minute? I've just got to go and get an injunction. And I'm like, you know, I'm trying to listen, you know, like Elton John's been caught doing something naughty or whatever. And so it's like, oh my God, this is fabulous. It's like, actually, what's interesting in the news isn't what's in the news, it's actually what's kept out of the news. So that was the basis for a book I wrote called Private Lives.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about the phrase bonkbuster, because your early novels were given this tag, weren't they? That kind of, that Jilly Cooper kind of vibe. I mean, what does that mean, and what did your mum think about that?
It's not so much my mum as my son now, and it's like, and now he's 11, and it's kind of, you know, we're at school, and everybody, all the parents have got sensible jobs, and it's like, she writes naughty things. And so now they're getting to the age where they kind of want to read my books. I'm literally having to say no, and he doesn't quite understand why. You know, my poor mum and dad, they love it, but they thought I was going to be a lawyer, and now I'm there sort of like basically a peddler of smut, I think, yeah.
Because you do have previous, don't you, in terms of saucy scenes, because Tammy used to be the editor of More magazine, which I'm sure a lot of you here will remember, position of the fortnight, that kind of thing.
I am a very respectable person.
So anyway, should we move on?
Let's move quickly on, yeah.
So you once almost wrote a book with Donald Trump, didn't you? This is a good story.
This is a good story. This is actually, you're one of the few people who know this story. So actually, yes, let's share the story right now. But so I wrote a book about 6 years ago now called Kiss Heaven Goodbye. And it was probably my bonkiest of bonkbusters. And it was set over 20 years, and it was about 4 people who had this amazing summer on, they all basically go to boarding school, and one of the dads has got a sort of a Richard Branson-esque Necker Island, and they all go there, and something bad happens, and it follows them over 20 years and shows how this experience has changed their lives. And that was it, thought nothing of it. And then I get a call from my agent. Would you be interested in ghostwriting something? So I said, well, depends what it was. And my books are really, really thick. They take quite a long time, so I didn't really have time to do it. And I said, who's the client? It's like, well, it's Donald Trump. So I was like, oh, okay. And at the time, he was doing The Apprentice in America. And he was looking for a ghostwriter to write a book, a novel, and he'd got a book deal and everything. So I popped my hat in the ring. At the time, I just had visions of myself discussing plot lines at Mar-a-Lago or whatever it's called, with his orange hands. But anyway, sadly I was... Hey?
Wow.
Look, well, yeah, you're right. And actually, I got rejected. He apparently wanted a bigger name. And I'm like, you know, really? Is Stephen King going to do this? I'm not sure he is. Anyway, so meanwhile, Kiss Heaven Goodbye comes out, and I get another phone call. It didn't work out with Donald's first ghostwriter. And Donald, and actually in the email, he was referred to as the Donald. The Donald's read the prologue to Kiss Heaven Goodbye, which actually features a megalomaniac bisexual billionaire. So I'm slightly like alarmed where that came from. But he thinks you're absolutely perfect for the gig. And so I was like, okay. And I said,
he likes a bonkbuster then?
The Donald liked it. The Donald liked it. Anyway, and so that's where we were. And I said to John, I said, you know, but that was my husband. I said, I think I'm going to do this. I think this is going to be, it'd be fun if nothing else. And then we actually got into negotiations, and he was a better deal maker than me. And it did come unstuck on the money, because I would have literally have had to take a year out. So in the end, I said no, and the book never happened. And then I was actually away doing a festival thing when the election happened, and I was in Portugal. I remember my little boy phoned me up and said, "Mummy, I've been watching the elections. You should have done the book." And he's absolutely right. And it's funny because I actually turned it down because of the money, and then I went back and read the small print in the contract, and there was actually a really generous royalties payment that had been built into it. So I probably would have been a multi-millionaire right now. Yeah. But
hey,
I may have been broke. So there
you
we
may
go,
have been
yeah.
broke, exactly. And you wrote your first book when you were really heavily pregnant, weren't you? And you were the editor of In Style, the glossy magazine. You were super disciplined, and I'm sure there's a lot of people here who are perhaps interested in trying to write a book, or perhaps doing a bit of writing after work each night. Any tips on how to kind of that sort of discipline, how to write, I suppose, when your life is busy?
Number one, just be really motivated. I think for me, and we're talking about this just a few minutes ago, I was kind of 35, 36 at the time. I was just married, pregnant, looked around the magazine industry and just thought everybody disappears over the age of 40. So I kind of need my escape plan, and that was really motivating. Secondly, I was disciplined, and so I used to have every Saturday morning and every Wednesday night were just my writing time.
So is it about carving out?
So it's absolutely about carving out. And I said, I used to say do 1,000 words on those 2 slots, and actually you write 2,000 words a week. It mounts up pretty quickly, actually. I used to do it on holiday, and looking back, I think, crikey, I probably didn't have much, any holiday time really for that year, but it mounted up. And the third thing is I'd tried to write novels before, but I'd actually sort of not got very far with it. But the idea, which was Daddy's Girls, I was really into, so it kind of felt like the story that I wanted to tell, and I was desperate to tell it, so everything just sort of dovetailed together, and I finished the day before I went into hospital to have my son. So
it was quite the deadline,
so it was
wasn't
quite
it?
a deadline, yeah.
And can you just give us a little bit of an exclusive on what your next book is going to be and what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah, I'm just debating whether to go home back to London tonight or whether to stay, because champagne is calling. Because actually my publicist's in the audience tonight, and she will say I'm a bit late now on delivering my next book, which I'm quite excited about. Actually, part of it takes place in Provence and part takes place in Oxford, actually, so I've been really enjoying writing that. So that's out next summer.
And have you been to Provence and Oxford?
Well, that was a case actually where rather than going to visit the place, once I decided about the idea, I'd sort of been to this really gorgeous little village and thought this will be beautiful for something, and actually fitted in with this idea that I'm doing at the moment. And I have also got to finish a thriller, so back to the Donald Trump thing, when I realised that possibly, if I was really organised with my time, fit in something else. I actually wrote a book called The Proposal, and then when I finished that, I started writing this little thriller, and it was literally just sitting on my desktop, and I was doing like a couple of 1,000 words every 3 months, and that built up, and I've just sold that, so that will be out next year as well, and that's been sold to Sony Pictures.
So that's going to be a movie, isn't it?
That's amazing.
Emily Blunt's agent has been in touch to find out if the script's ready, but sadly the book's not even written yet. So we've had to put Emily on hold, very sadly.
She did Girl on the Train, didn't she? So
she did, and actually it was a really weird case of the film rights got sold before I got a book deal. So the lady who found the book actually found Girl on the Train as well. So that's quite exciting.
Well, this will
yeah.
probably be the first and last time we get Tammy here then, once she moves to Hollywood. So
the Hamptons.
Once she moves to the Hamptons, yeah.
Chance to be a fan.
Thank you so much. I'd love to
Kerry.
talk to you all night, but we need to move on because we've got 5 authors. So we're going to have some questions for Tammy and Lizzie shortly. So if you've got anything you want to ask Tammy, hold that thought for now. And I'm going to hand back over to Hero, who's going to speak to Elizabeth Heathcote.
Hello, Lizzie. Hello. So Elizabeth's novel, Undertow, you can hold it up, Lizzie, give it a little, there we go. It's a twisty, hugely atmospheric page-turner. It was described by The Guardian as chilling thrills by the sea. I said cheap thrills by the sea when I did this earlier in practice, but it's not cheap thrills, it's chilling thrills by the sea. And it follows Carmen, who starts to suspect her husband killed his ex-lover. And perhaps you could read us just a little bit, Lizzie, to give us a flavour.
Now, unfortunately, my book, like Tasmina's, we discovered both about people who've drowned. So you've got another drowning here. A bit of a theme to the night. The tide was going out below her, but the waves were winter waves as tall as her daughter, crashing onto the beach and dragging everything they could find back with them. How could she have been so stupid, that bloody ball? It was in her hand still, she was squeezing it tight. This was the last time she would let her daughter out of her sight, even for a second. Cheyenne, Roxy, she heard a bark to her left, not close. Oh, thank God, she touched her fluttering heart. Her breath slowed a little. How silly of her. She set off after the bark, moved faster through the shingle now, so that she was quickly breathless. How could they have got so far so quickly? Cheyenne. Through the drizzle, she could see movement ahead and below her near the waves. It was the dog, long and flat, down on all fours, then leaping in the air and dropping again. He was playing with something, the way he worried a bucket or a duster at home, a poor domestic substitute for some ancient memory of hunting. There was no sign of her daughter. Cheyenne. She ran towards the dog and he bounded towards her, but stopped halfway and twisted round on his hind legs to run back to the same spot. There was something there, some piece of flotsam he was busy with. He was barking at it, calling her over to show her. It was a person, she thought, lying face down on the beach. It's not her daughter. I'm just saying that because I couldn't read a book that's about someone's daughter. But anyway, she finds her daughter, someone else.
So it's a fantastic thriller, full of these fantastic twists and turns, as you would want in a thriller. But can you talk us through the process of actually writing it? Do you have to plot it to the nth degree, or is it something that kind of, you suddenly think of a new plot twist halfway through? How does it work for you?
Well, for me, I was talking to you about this earlier. I'm a plotter, so I plot my books really thoroughly before I start. I know not completely what's going to happen, but I know pretty well. And then as I write, things do come up and new characters appear. But I mean, people are very different, writers are very different, and you get plotters and you get pantsers. And pantsers are people who don't plot, and they take a character and they follow them, and they're writing by the seat of their pants. So I'm a plotter. But both, and they both have their pros and cons. But I do think for thriller, it is helpful to plot.
So talking about the psychological thriller, obviously it's been the dominant genre, really, hasn't it, the last few years? So we mentioned, didn't we, Girl on the Train and, of course, Gone Girl, the 2 big mega hits. But what do you think? Why can't readers get enough of these kind of thrillers at the moment, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I don't really, I'm not, it's a kind of sociologist question in a way, isn't it? I don't really know. But I mean, what I do think is, they're very gripping, obviously. One of the key things about these books is they absorb your attention completely. You're completely wrapped up in them. They usually wrap up at the end. So you take difficult, complicated things and they usually wrap up into a satisfactory ending. I mean, what I do think is interesting is that before this, we had Chick Lit, which was obviously all nice and bouncy and fun and started with Bridget Jones. And I think that did kind of cover a period of like, you know, the 90s and the first part of this century when things were probably a bit easier than they are now and things were a bit more optimistic. And I think now, you know, these probably reflect our troubled times to a certain extent. If I was being a sociologist.
So when you're writing about these dark themes all the time, you must tell the story. I was talking to Lizzie with prep last week, and she was telling me about in the 90s when all that chick lit was going on, and you were asked, weren't you, to write a chick lit novel?
Yeah, no. Well, I'd written a domestic noir, but like this then, and at that stage, I mean, they weren't fashionable, and publishers thought they were quite interested, but they thought it was a bit small. They were like, the subject matter's a bit small, and so I thought, I'll go off and have a go at this genre of the moment. I'll write some chick lit, and I sat down and started writing it. In about chapter 2, the first person died, and you know, and I just thought. It really sort of told me that you can, for me, I'm really impressed by you going from one genre to another, because I really just don't think I can do it. I think must have a very suspicious mind.
But when you're writing those kind of stories, so, you know, it's all murder and intrigue, and it can be quite immersive and depressing, can't it?
Yeah.
And what do you do to kind of alleviate that? You're kind of going out sort of clubbing or something. What are you doing to kind of alleviate the, sort of the stresses of your mind?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't find it depressing. I was saying sometimes because you've kind of, like sometimes when you're writing, it's a bit like being a medium. So you get like you're an actor, you go into role and you're sort of living this. And sometimes I scare myself because you're writing this and, you know, and it's like, so, but I don't actually get depressed by it, luckily. Sometimes there's so much plot that it literally fills my head up, and I can't go to the grocery and can't remember what I've gone for, but I don't actually get depressed by it, thankfully.
And how does it work with the plot thing? Because, you know, I'm sure, you know, when you pick up a thriller, you know, you're looking, aren't you, all the thing, it can't be them, you know, that's too obvious. So you're second guessing your reader, aren't you? You must know that people are really going to be looking for it. How do you absolutely do that killer plot twists?
I do. I get gutted if people work out who did it, which they do, obviously. You know, some people go, got it on page 2, and you're like, you know, because to me it's a real triumph if, you know, you go, God, it was such a surprise at the end. I mean, I think for me, I've always loved those kind of books. I know what I want to write, which is crime novels that are really engrossing and suspenseful. But they're a puzzle. You are trying to work out what happened, and you've got a really satisfying twist. So I set out to do that. But I mean, it's not easy, because obviously you just have to look for that twist. You have to just try and stay one step ahead. You have to tell me if I've succeeded. Have a little poll.
One of the great things about Lizzie is that obviously you haven't been writing all the time for 20 years, have you? But you've wanted to be a writer for 20 years. So there have been times when you've been doing it a lot, and then other times when not at all, big long journey. But can you talk us through that? Because you might know, actually, Elizabeth was at The Independent on Sunday and was a contemporary of Maggie O'Farrell. They were writing their first novel at the same time. And
she sold hers and I didn't sell mine,
What was that like, you know, you've got to keep that self-belief, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard because, the thing is, I think that we all know it's a really hard thing to become a novelist and to sell a novel. And, you know, the best people have loads of rejections. Not no, but I mean, it's very common. And a lot of people that you've heard of, if you hear their story, they'll have had 2 or 3. But I mean, obviously what is problematic is actually getting that done, you know, because it's really hard work. And, you know, we have to earn a living as well, and we have families and children. So it was something I really wanted to do, and it was something I had a drive to do. And I think that if you don't, I don't think you do it, because you have to sacrifice a lot, really, to make time and space. So you have to, I mean, I worked less than I would have done for quite a lot of years, really, to prioritise it. But I think I just reached a point, so it was a long journey, and there were obviously highs and lows and disappointments. But I think at some point I did actually think, this is what I want to do with my life, so I'm going to do whatever the outcome, I'm going to devote some time to this. And after that, I felt a bit better about it.
Are there any budding authors in the audience? Is anybody writing a novel? Or you're writing one? Have you got any advice to someone who's at an early stage, or, you know, all of you actually, I'm sure you'll have good advice.
My advice would be the same as Tasmina's, in that I think that what you have to do, you have to take yourself seriously, and you have to make time for it. and you have to ring fence that time. So I shut now when I write, I mean, I've got children to do, but what I do is I shut the door. My son's now in sixth form, so he doesn't actually go to school till 9, and 8 o'clock I shut the door in his face. I say, writing time. Until 12 o'clock, I have to do that, because I wouldn't get it done otherwise, you know. And I think you have to do that all the way along, because there's always people who, you know, and there's always other things to do, aren't there? That's my advice.
In fact, I just want to ask about Clover, actually. Clover's got 5 children.
Yeah.
How do you actually write a novel with 5 children running around?
Well, I wrote memoirs, so it was slightly different, but it is still, I mean, it's difficult. When I was writing as well, I'd had my 4th child, and then I sold the book, and then I found out that I was pregnant, so I had to, as well, like when you were writing your first book, actually, I had that like 9-month deadline, which was quite motivating. But
it's a common theme, really, isn't it, across the couch?
I don't know if that's a plan. It's difficult. And I have to have help. I have to have, you know, childcare help to get it done. But my problem is that I find that my best writing time is from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon till about 7. That's when I would love to write every day. And obviously, with all my children coming home, it's like the most impossible moment in the day to write. So, and also, I think just when you've got lots of kids or one child, you have to like just grab the moment. You must know what it's like. You know, if there's 45 minutes, you have to just suddenly get that work done and be disciplined about that and not spend too long faffing around on social media, which is obviously where a lot of time goes as well.
Yeah. And so, Lizzie, just in terms of your going back to this 20-year journey, really, to get this book deal and to get published, has it been worth it? Do you think, oh God, yes, it's fantastic being a published author, and there's my book, and here I am, and ask me some questions?
I mean, it was a very sweet moment. Yeah, it was lovely, because obviously I've been waiting for it for a long time. But I mean, it had changed, because I think like 20 years ago when I wrote that first book and I didn't get it published, I was absolutely gutted, you know. And now there was less weighing on it. I mean, I would have been a bit, you know, upset having written another one if I didn't. But because I thought I'd sort of decided this was part of my life, it was less. And also my life was more established. I'd got a career. I'd kept other things going. So yeah, it's lovely. And it's, but you know, it's not like you become a millionaire and it's life-changing. The great payoff for me is that I now get to do this most of the time. And that's lovely. I'm not fitting it in between lots of other work. So I work 1 day a week at Psychologies, and the rest of my time I can now write. And that is the great reward, I think.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Put your hands up. Come on. Yay! We got a question.
I'm just wondering, Tasmina, you've been competitive. I'm afraid I haven't read any of your books yet. Obviously, I'm going to read them all. Have you got a continuity figure like Rupert Campbell there?
I haven't actually, and one theme that keeps coming out, because I sort of, it's back to what Kerry was saying, where'd you get your ideas from? And mine are very sort of specific. Like I met a friend and she's like, come and meet my new boyfriend, and he was like, you know, he was a multi-millionaire, and it was like, there was a theme with all her boyfriends who were all multi-millionaires, and that's where Gold Diggers came from. So every idea is specific, but increasingly it's I'm noticing that a lot of the people that kind of almost reach Jilly iconic status, it's not so much the author that they love as well. I mean, we all love Jilly, but actually it's the characters that they really love as well. And I think when you're writing one-offs, you know, I've actually, I'm just developing a TV show actually with 2 characters at the moment, and it's because I never took those characters anywhere, and somebody got hold of it and said, those 2 characters are really interesting. So I think, honestly, that's where everything is going, and I think when I sit down to write the next book, I probably will be trying to channel a really juicy character that I can take forward. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Sounds like a good job you've got there. Any other questions?
I think you kind of answered it actually, because I read Private Lives and I wondered where the thing came from. But do you have a character first? Is it based on anyone, or is it completely, you know, made up out of your mind based on a circumstance or something around? Because, you know, when I was reading that, it was really easy reading.
Yeah.
And, you know, I could see like Duran Duran on a boat on a yacht and some guy in shorts and things like that. And I thought, I wonder if they were actually, you know, figures of your imagination or whether you'd actually met, there's a link to some of the characters.
It's a bit of both, to be honest. I mean, one of the reasons why I started writing was because I'd been a journalist sort of in the 90s when, like, literally, it was sort of, oh, do you want to go and interview Julio Iglesias? Oh, all right. And I was at his house getting a massage by him. It was like, oh, my God. Well, not a Harvey Weinstein type massage, but like a sort of, he was just there while I had my dictaphone. He just gave me a little shoulder rub, but he was very nice, man. He sent me Christmas cards for 5 years afterwards. Anyway, so with that, a lot of it, you know, this is my life, but as a journalist, I was really lucky to kind of, you know, and Kerry's had loads of these opportunities as well. You kind of see a snapshot of life that you wouldn't ordinarily see. And for me, that was a really motivating part of wanting to become a novelist, is having all these amazing experiences and kind of wanting to do something a bit more with them rather than bore my friends with them again. and yeah, Private Lives was, you know, one of my best friends is a media lawyer, and he's incredibly discreet, so he kind of, but yeah, really, in fact, speaking of sequels, that I think that definitely is one that perhaps could be revisited because it is really topical. So yeah, so a bit of both in answer to your question. Yeah, Gold Diggers came from a friend who will hold her hands up and go, this is how I select my men, and then other things. Yeah, there we go.
There's a question about the writing process of, so there's one thing writing, so how do you let go though of, when you've got your lovely novel that you've written and you think's amazing, how you let go of those characters? And it's really interesting you saying that 2 characters are going to go into a TV series, so how do you both work with someone else taking your story and your characters, and either as an editor or maybe changing the medium, how do you deal with that and the editing process? So obviously you write it once, but then I guess it's not just one writing, is it? It's revisiting it.
Do you want to go?
What you're talking about when an editor gets hold of it and wants to change things.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, you do get a lot of feedback from editors, or where you get a certain amount of feedback from people. And what I tend to do is, I think that often as a writer, you're doing something and you think there's something not quite right, but you might not be you might sort of getting away with it, you know, and then someone tells you, oh yeah, I don't know. But sometimes I get advice and I don't take it. So I think it's either ringing a bell with you or it's not. Would you agree with that one?
Yeah. I think for me, the test will be maybe with the thriller I've just written, and like the main character is a divorce barrister, and it's all set in Middle Temple in London. But by the time Hollywood's got their hands on it, it's probably starring The Rock, and he's a chef, and it's based in LA. So who knows? So I'll probably be quite upset about that, but then if there's a nice check at the end of it and I get to walk the red carpet with Emily Blunt, then I'll be happy. But I think generally creative teams, like whether it's editors or, are generally really supportive of your work, and often don't you think that's why they buy you? Because they actually see a really great character, and actually that's what they bought the book for. They don't
They want to improve it.
They want to improve it, and any suggestions are generally for the good, aren't they?
Thank you so much. We're going to just leave it there for the first half because we've got to rattle on. But obviously you can ask more questions in the second half to all the panellists. and so we'll just close it off. Go and get a quick glass of champers. Go and have a wee. Give me a clap. Just before we talk to our non-fiction authors in the second half, I just got a few very quick thank yous if you wouldn't mind. Secret Messages Interiors are a fantastic store in Buckingham, and they are the people who are responsible for lugging this sofa up those stairs today, creating this really wonderful set, I think, and doing these beautiful displays and everything. They have a store in Buckinghamshire. They've got a massive kind of workshop, and all of this stuff. It's very good price points. And you can buy everything that you see here. They're fantastic, and they sell online, so I would urge you to have a look. They really are, fantastic. We've worked with them for a number of years because they're quirky, different, and they have some really cool stuff, basically. Secret Messages Interiors. There's some cards that after we finish, we'll put them sort of over here, where the drinks are, and you can pick them up. And they really are cool. You can just have a little surf online and have a look for yourself. You will have also, if you didn't just sit on it, you'd have noticed you've got little goodie bags this evening from Powder. If you're not familiar with Tame, it's a fantastic little shop. It's just around the corner. You go down, sort of curl around, and it's cosmetics, beauty, but they have really great brands, quite niche. So Wren, Dr. Hauschka, Miller Harris, yeah, stuff that you just don't get on the high street. And also, if you've gone and had a little poke around, you'll see this 15% off, which is great, isn't it? So thank you very much to Powder, and it's very worth having a look. They've got some fantastic stuff in there. Finally, this lovely little stash of books here, all signed by the authors themselves. One of you's about to win. Oh, or maybe not, actually. Just realised that who's sitting. Well, anyway, let's have a go and see. If you can all have a little look under your seats and have a little. There's going to be a pink star for somebody. I know it's not very elegant to look under your seats. I've got a horrible feeling it's someone who's not sitting there.
Oh no.
I think it's the person. I think it's that one there. Somebody's moved. That's your coat. We're going to give it to you. Oh my God, that was just my worst nightmare come true when I saw that seat was empty. There, pass the star along. Here it comes. Hold it proud and up. Yay! So come at the end of the night. The stash is yours. And also there's a lovely little Orla-Keely.
It comes in a lovely Orla-Keely books in my bag. So
there we are.
If you come at the end, we'll get the authors to sign them. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll crack on with the second half, and Kerry is going to start things off talking to Alex.
Okay. So Alex, do you want to hold up your book?
So it's conveniently about learning to swim, which some of you
We've got a bit of a got a bit of a drowning, swimming kind of theme running through things tonight, haven't we? So so Alex has had a busy year. She's published Leap In, her book about learning to swim. She's also ghostwritten Judy Murray's autobiography, Knowing the Score, which we've got in our stack there as well. And she's also had a baby, who is just over there and very, very quiet. And we're hoping he won't wake up in the next 10 minutes. Yeah. So, but let's talk about Leap In first. I mean, you literally learned to swim for this book, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I thought I could swim. I could do sort of rubbish, my mum on trying to cool down on holiday type breaststroke, and gamely got into the sea in Brighton thinking I just needed to do a couple of tweaks, and realised that I just powerfully couldn't swim.
Because you live in Brighton, don't you?
Yeah, and it was awful. It was like a kind of massive panic attack, and then like within 2 days my house was flooded because there was a massive storm on the seafront, and I was like, I have to conquer this now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did learn to swim. I did a year-long course that sort of taught me to swim from basics and then into being able to swim in the sea. So it was like an exercise and sport thing, and a sort of psychological overcoming terror thing.
And at what point did you sort of realise there was a book in it?
It was not for quite a while, because I'd written Running Like a Girl, which was a book about running, and I was really interested in women's bodies and sport, and people they were really, at that time, like Running Like a Girl was 5 years ago, and the market was only selling sport to women as a way to get thin. There was no sense that there might be any kind of joy or camaraderie or sort of getting to know your body for its own value rather than how to make it look nicer for other people. And I'd kind of become really interested in this. And then I was writing what I thought was a really sort of powerful and interesting book about boxing and ballet. And I was taking Muay Thai boxing lessons and doing ballet at English National Ballet. And I was hating it. There was nothing to say. And I was learning to swim as a sort of backdrop. This was like in my head it was a private project. And it took a good sort of 6 or 9 months to realise that having worked in publishing for 12 years and already written several books, I should follow the well-known advice to write about the thing that you love. And then finally the penny dropped, and I did Leap In.
And that was the thing. Do you want to read us a little bit from it so we can get a flavour
Yeah,
of it?
it's... I love this bit because it's the bit that Women's Hour let me read on air, and it was quite a thrill that they let me say arse on Radio 4. It's been a pathetic career goal to have.
We'll let you say arse as
It
well,
worked
Alex.
for me. It's about, I went to do this one-day swimming course. This was when I thought I just needed to tweak my stroke. And I'd never put on a wetsuit before. And they sent me off to the changing room with like a higher wetsuit. And I was like, okay, great, I'll go put it on. It's going to be fantastic. I thought I'd known true loneliness. There'd been so many Saturday evenings spent with only Danish crime dramas and a bar of Lindt touch of sea salt for company. Countless weddings where I was the fun one at the table, only to dart home alone in melancholy lest someone expected me to cop off with an usher. And school reunions where everyone compared childbirth stories while I provided a jolly tale about falling over during a marathon by way of comparison. But none of these things were true loneliness, because the loneliest place on earth is halfway into, halfway out of a wetsuit. And that's where I got stuck. My body was by now clammy all over, radiating heat as a result of the balmy day, the warmth of the pool environment and the rush of blood created by the prospect of getting changed. I dived right in, plunging my calves into the lower half of the wetsuit, then tried to yank the rest up from the waist. I say waist, but the neoprene was very, very far from there. All I'd managed to do was create a baguette-width roll of wetsuit just beneath my hips, an unwelcome arse shelf. The spongy flesh that made up my haunches was now sitting in a magnificent display of rococo arse cleavage above the neoprene corsetry. The part of my legs within the wetsuit seemed to have gone cold, possibly as a result of inadequate circulation, while the skin directly above the haunches was becoming ever stickier with sweat, proving an effective braking system for any fabric I tried to pull over it. Where had all of this me come from? So, that's brilliant. Sporting endeavours, the rubbish.
Which leads us quite nicely onto my next question, actually, because one of the things I really like about your book is, you acknowledge the fact that one of the major barriers for women to go swimming is having to put on a swimsuit, to put it really basically.
Yeah, it is, and there's research about it, and I had a really depressing meeting with Sport England and This Girl Can about it, and it's the reason that I write these sorts of books that aren't sort of Fitspo, Instagram, you can be the best kind of, that are just, it's okay to be quite rubbish and also have access to these things that might give you joy. And it's like my life's work to try and sort of explain the maths to people, that those maybe 15 seconds from when you sort of unfurl yourself from underneath the towel and hang it up and have to walk, and you can kind of see your thighs doing that every time you tread on the tiles, and then get to the poolside until you're in and you've got the anonymity and it's just your head again. It's such a small amount of time compared to the time that you then spend in the water or spend feeling blissfully tired without any aches afterwards. But it does feel like 3.5 hours, that walk, the first few times, and it's prohibitively agonising. But it is one of those things that the more you do it, the compression is so fast that suddenly it does begin to feel like 15 seconds, because you know what's coming is exponentially better than the horror of the walk. But you can't know that till you've done it, and it's all of these people who just won't or feel that they can't, but they can, and it's...
Because I mean, you do write in a very sort of warm, reassuring, kind of big sisterly way with your sports writing, with the running and with the swimming, and and we've touched on this already, but what I like about the way you write is you're not one of those terrifying women that you might see on Instagram, with the crop tops and really, really frightening kind of fitness influencers. And that's great, but they tend to be 21 years old and they've got 8-packs, and most of us are never going to look like that. And you're more of an every woman, but is it important to show that sport is for everyone and exercise is for everyone?
Yeah, because it is. So it really felt like I was the only person saying it with Running Like a Girl. And swimming, there's been like a real groundswell this year of swimming memoirs, and it's like we're kind of the swimming Spice Girls. There's like someone I've done like infertility spice, and then there's someone who's done grief, and there's someone who's done anxiety, and there's someone else who's done something else. And it is that sort of, I think sports writing had become so male. The sports narrative had been about winning or being the best, or it was a very competitive sounding story, even if they were accessing other emotions. And for women, it was absolutely all about making yourself look better for other people rather than feel better for yourself. And I feel so strongly that if someone my shape and my level of rubbishness can derive so much pleasure from it, there must be so many other people who can too. And I've kind of got the bit between my teeth now, because I know, because people write to me and tell me, so I'm like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just a guide to swimming, although there is practical advice in it, but it's a very personal story as well, isn't it? And you talk very movingly about swimming while you were having IVF treatment.
Yeah.
And it's very
Spoiler
open.
alert.
And it's okay, a bit of a spoiler perhaps. But you know, did you plan to, I mean, you're very open, it's very raw. I mean, did you plan that?
Not at
or
all.
did it just kind of come into the narrative?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the book that was commissioned by my editor, who was the same editor as Running Like a Girl, had a much more similar narrative. So I did 5 marathons over the course of Running Like a Girl, and this was going to be much more kind of. I went to Ithaca. I had it in my head I wanted to swim like Ithaca and be like a Lady Odysseus, and I did manage to do that one. And I had all these other sort of goal swims. I wanted to swim from Alcatraz, and I wanted to swim. Like those sorts of big name swims or big distance swims. And what happened was I realised that we had to have IVF, and it didn't go very well, and it ended up taking up way more than a year of my life. And I just slightly hid from my editor and hoped she wouldn't realise that I wasn't doing a lot of the things that were in the original proposal. But what actually happened was a more interesting story, because swimming, it's the sport that you can do if you're ill or unhappy or injured. It's the one that will accept everyone. And that it became that story about it being a place of complete solace and safety when my body was letting me down and felt completely alien to me and was basically being taken over by doctors and drugs. And it allowed me to still have this sort of time and place where I was the one that lived in my body, not other forms and spreadsheets and needles and things.
Absolutely. And any thoughts on what sport you'll write about next? I was maybe buggy fit, I was wondering.
I'm slightly obsessed by wrestling. I went to, but I don't know if
Did anyone
becoming a female wrestler.
Did anyone watch Glow, the Netflix
That was it. It was
series
Glow.
about wrestling?
And,
That was female wrestlers.
And there's a film coming out next year which does have The Rock in it, which is it's based on a female wrestler from Norwich who's subsequently gone on to become a massive WWE.
Is this a real
Yeah,
story?
but it's a film of her life, and it's going to be huge. Like, The Rock is playing her dad, and she's got like 3 million followers, and no one even knows who she is over here.
Wow.
So female wrestling is going to be massive, and it is really interesting. I just don't know if it's going to be that experiential journey into female wrestling. Mom! I don't know.
I can't wait to see your outfit for that one, Alex.
Like Medela pumps or something. I don't know.
We should talk about your ghostwriting as well, because time is short. So, as I mentioned, Alex has spent a lot of time recently with Judy Murray, writing her book with her. So, can you just tell us a bit about what she was like to work with, and how much time you spent, like how that process works when you're working with a celebrity like that?
She's amazing. I have limitless time and affection for her, because I literally got pregnant the day we signed the contracts. And so the whole book was written while I was pregnant, and it is basically a book about motherhood. I don't know if she wanted it to be as when I ended up no, she did. But I wrote to her more than 2 years ago, before she was on Strictly, because I think she's incredible. She's ridden the wave of a really horrendous tabloid experience through no fault of her own. And it's really interesting, because the way that tennis works is unlike any sport where you keep having these gaps, and all the tennis we ever see is on BBC, so there are no ads to go to. So Wimbledon coverage has nothing better to do than to look at what, plaid David Beckham's wearing or Kate Middleton's hair. And for a lot of the time it was Judy Murray, what she was doing with her face and all that kind of thing. And she has an incredible story. She was Scotland's national coach, and she's completely inspiring on all sorts of levels. And I wrote to her and basically wrote her a love letter and said, I think you're amazing. I think there's a really interesting book. And I'm not a sharky journalist who wants to do one of those sort of kind of whack it out, this is my story, but I want to do something interesting about women in sport and the journey and the sort of battle that she's fought. And I got a letter back from her agent saying Judy isn't interested right now. And I thought, well, it was worth a try, I'll never hear from her again. And then she did Strictly, and it was like, oh, she's going to have like a range of pans or something next, and it's all gone and over. And then I delivered Leap In, and within, like, I'd done my edits, and within about a fortnight, I got a letter back saying Judy's now interested in writing a book. So it was really lovely sense of validation that she'd decided to do it then, so I wasn't twisting her elbow. And we met once a week, thrillingly, at Wimbledon, and we sort of had a plan, and I would talk to her and we sort of did a chapter a week, and then we'd catch up. And she knew what she wanted to say, and I knew what I thought was interesting, and largely they correlated. And sometimes I'd have to kind of go, let's order some more eclairs, we need to talk about this some more. And sometimes she'd come out with some completely amazing, interesting story that I had no idea was even in existence.
Did you meet Andy and Jamie Murray?
I met Jamie, but I didn't meet Andy because it was his crazy year of non-stop touring, winning every single thing, whereas Jamie was like a bit more around.
Do you,
Not winning so much.
He's world number one. But she was living in Jamie's house, so it was more easy to see him.
do you, when you're ghostwriting, I know you've done other books with other celebrities, haven't you? Do you have to like that person, or do you just have to find them interesting? Or do you grow to like them the more time you spend with them? Tell us. Who's horrible, Alex? Tell us.
No, I've not done anything with anybody horrible. But the thing with people who are genuinely really interesting is that the things that they've done that make them interesting, they've generally done because they thought they were commonplace. Like, nobody goes, I'm going to be so interesting if I do this, so I'm totally going to do it. The people who are sincerely interesting, like Judy, have just battled on. Like the amount of times I typed up transcribing the tapes were her saying, well, there just didn't seem anything else to do. And it's literally like, so I made a new tennis school, or I did a PR course, or I learned accounting in 7 different nations so that Andy wouldn't get fleeced again. And all, like, those are really interesting things, but the people who you ghostwrite never think they're interesting. So it's more like corralling people away from these quite tedious vendetta-y stories. Not in Judy's case, actually, but more reality stars have sometimes
Because you've
got.
done, just tell people who else
I've done, before Judy, I'd done mostly TV stuff, like, you know, like Made in Chelsea people. And I did, the first ghostwriting book I did like 6 or 7 years ago she was then Miss England, but she'd also served in Iraq. And again, it was that thing where she'd had a bravery award for like fending off fighters on behalf of like 4 men. But it was like getting blood from a stone. You were like, so, and I go, were you scared? And she'd go, yeah. And then you have to kind of go, so what happens when you're scared? Do your palms go sweaty? Does your heart race? And then she's like, I suppose. And it's like you have to have enough narrative or imagination of your own, because generally, like, there's a reason that she was in Iraq or doing Miss England and not being a writer, was because she has no sense of storytelling. And Judy is the same, like, she's completely pragmatic, and she'll tell the story, and I'd be transcribing it and like, oh my God, thank God I like Judy, because this is like, this is a Wimbledon final.
So what's the sort of juiciest tidbit someone's told you, and do you get things taken out by lawyers quite a lot?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, like I'm staring at like a massive camera. I would say the safest thing I could say is that Andy's lawyers took a massive chunk out of Judy's book. Not anything to do with Judy, but because of, like, I would say an incident that was going towards the Harvey Weinstein area.
Right.
That was not anything as bad as that, and if that, you know, it's not like a tabloidy thing, but it was like a really negative, sharky male figure that happened and was not able to be written about in any way.
We're not talking about
not
Andy and
sexually.
Jamie Murray, are we? We're talking someone in that world.
It was someone in the tennis world.
Yeah.
In when Andy was like a youngster that showed promise.
Okay,
And it was like a massive sort of deal
okay.
for Judy at that time. She had no advice. She was from Dunblane. Andy was like prodigy beyond any of her expectations, and so was Jamie at that point as well.
Yeah.
And I think one of the main reasons she wanted to do the book was to give advice to other parents of any sort of exceptional children, whether they're pianists or gymnasts or whatever, about that sort of terrifying journey, that sort of point when you realise the pendulum has swung, that they're going to go further than you, so you're going to be in the dark from now on in.
Yeah.
And that point for her, I think, was there was like a bad character who is not in the book.
Okay, fair enough. And if you could ghostwrite anyone's autobiography, who would be your dream subject?
Ooh, I don't know. I really like you're like Harvey Weinstein. Like, bastard! That's not going in. That's going in. That's not going in.
That would be a tricky one, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So I don't know if that will happen, but yeah, I don't know. They're a bit like Tammy was saying. It's that thing of you poodle through life with your ears open to everything, and then things suddenly spread. Like, it is a source of hilarity to like my school friends that I'm not only a sports writer, but someone. I like the Judy Murray book is nominated for the William Hill Prize, which is like this really prestigious sports award. I did no sport from the ages of 13 to 33. It's insane.
Were you the last one to get picked in PE and that kind of thing?
Oh my God, completely.
Yeah.
I was like the one that they forgot to pick because I was tying my shoelaces or whatever. And it's, I mean, beyond ridiculous to people who knew me at school. It's just
fabulous. And with writing, any kind of, do you have any writing rituals? Are there any ways, I mean,
internet blocking software.
I was about to say distraction,
Yeah.
Online distraction is just enough, well, for any job, isn't it now, if you're by a
Yeah.
computer? What, any kind
I
of
have to
advice
build
or tips?
myself up when I'm doing a book. So you can do like a 700-word piece of journalism or even 2,000-word piece of journalism, just about without it. But you have to have that sort of sense of pace and narrative when you're writing a book that will kind of be arced across a whole chapter rather than just a page of the internet. And to do that, I think you have to have Facebook, for longer stretches of time.
Yeah.
And so I do, it's like getting fit. It's the only way that I can do it is I literally have to start chapter 1 10 minutes offline.
Yeah.
Because you find yourself just like drifting over to the email page.
Yeah.
You don't make that decision. You just find, oh, what am I doing? Oh, hold on, I'm like having an argument.
I do wonder
about...
if we'll all go back to writing on typewriters just to...
Yeah, and then I have to build it up till I'm doing sort of 90 minutes or 2 or 3 hours at a time. But it's like with fitness, like I'm going to have to start running all over again in a month.
From the beginning.
And start from the beginning, and it was going to be the same. It's the same every book with writing.
Yeah. And sort of future, what plans have you got? Any new books you can tell us about? Anything else?
I don't, because I was a sort of quite conveniently timed baby, which means that he was born sort of between hardback and paperback releases of these books. So I'm not going back to work properly and to write until the Leap-In is out in paperback and Judy's out in paperback in the spring. So I'm taking a while, because I'm probably only going to have one baby, and he's fun and portable, and I just want to have this time for now. And also, I haven't got anything I want to say about what I'm experiencing at the moment, and I'm not doing that much sport at the moment, and I'm not sort of out there meeting lots and lots of people for work at the moment. So you have to sort of let those things come to you by being alert to it rather than...
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think we'll leave it there and move on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And if anyone's got any questions for Alex, again, we'll do it at the end of the section, so hold those thoughts for now, and I'm going to hand you back over to Hero.
Lovely, thank you, Kerry.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
So I'm going to talk to Sasha Wilkins, a Liberty London girl with a lovely lettuce. I don't know if anyone's seen the little dog lettuce, who's been so good all night, hasn't she? Sasha's book, Friends, Food, Family, it's a cookbook for the modern cook who loves to entertain but does not want to get up at 5 a.m. to stuff vol au vents. I think we can all relate to that. It's also something of a global travel guide, really, isn't it? It's peppered with your recommendations, favourite fashion museums or best beaches, or where to have a picnic, that kind of thing. Have you got the book with you, Sasha? Do you want to have a little...
In best Blue Peter style, of course.
Exactly. Read a little bit for us and give us a flavour.
I am not a chef, I'm a cook. and I have been since the age of 4, when my mother first taught me how to roll out pastry with a tiny wooden rolling pin from my Galt children's baking set, a present from my godmother Rachel. Thanks to them, it seemed natural to spend as much time as I could in the kitchen when I was growing up, and so all my earliest memories from the 70s revolve around food. Wherever I find myself in the world, I cook for my friends and the people that I meet along the way. It's always a challenge. I get used to new kitchens, different ingredients, cooking with whatever I can find. On my last road trip in California, I travelled with a box of kitchen essentials in the boot of my car. And I will never forget sugar pouring out onto somebody's head on an overnight coach journey in Australia when I forgot to seal my backpack. Some of my most memorable meals have been cooked in the most unexpected of places. A youth hostel by the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco with raccoons sitting by the window. A children's home in Singapore where I learnt to cook ramen. A hotel kitchen in New Delhi. I've always said that I'm not into napkin origami and I don't obsess about matching plates. I'm as likely to serve my cakes as fat slices wrapped in greaseproof paper as I am to decorate them with crystallized violets on a vintage cake stand. My soups will work just as well in a vacuum flask up a mountain as they do in porcelain bowls of matching sauces. Above all, I believe that it is the atmosphere we create around our food that matters, not the place or the manner in which it is served, although that's not to say I don't love a starched tablecloth when one comes my way. But I like to serve simple food using carefully thought out ingredients that allow me to spend as much time talking to my friends and family as I do sweating over a stove. I don't pretend to have all the answers in the kitchen and in the dining room, but what I do have is a head full of recipes and ways to serve up delicious food that is kind to your body and to your budget.
Well, anyone who reads your blog, Liberty London Girl, will know anyway that you're very passionate about food and family, and that's, you know, obviously that's all part of that book. But can you tell me how did you come to write the book? Were you approached to do that? Did it come kind of naturally from the blog itself, or did you approach anybody?
So before I started Liberty London Girl, which is a blog that's turned into sort of a website lifestyle platform, here and I have been talking about how do you describe a blog that's become a bit more than a blog. And I started it 11 years ago. I'd never seen another blog. There was no social media. Actually, that's a lie. I'd seen one other blog. It was Belle de Jour. But given that I didn't wish to pursue a career as a call girl, it wasn't really providing me with a lot of guidance. So I was really kind of moving in the dark with the whole blogging thing. It was a huge surprise to me that people started to read it in 2007. I'd been a journalist and a fashion editor for a long time. I was an editor at Condé Nast Traveller for 5 years. I worked as a fashion stylist around the world. I launched a magazine for The Observer, and then I was working as a fashion stylist. I've had the world's most non-linear career. I've also been a film critic. I mean, I really have done all of the things. But I moved to New York on a complete whim. I was doing things like taking trunks of clothes to Cape Town, styling catalogue shoots for 2 weeks, and then kind of flying back to New York, and my assistant would take the clothes back to London. And I would just I lived in New York without a visa, and I wrote this blog every day. And it was totally anonymous, and it was the food I cooked from buying. I used to had a really awful pink bicycle that I bought on Craigslist, like Gumtree. I used to bike up to Union Square Green Market and buy fresh food. And my blog was a proper old school weblog. It was a diary. It was the really shocking dates that I had in New York. Oh my God. I go back and read 2007 and horrify myself by the quality of the men that I dated. So many disasters, so many. But food was always this constant stream in everything I did. And I'd actually written a cookbook back in 2002. But back then, when we were all journalists, people didn't buy cookbooks from fashion editors because, you know, you had no platform to promote it on. So it sort of sat in a drawer. And I'm actually revisiting, my next cookbook is revisiting that book that I wrote nearly 17 years ago. It's called Meat and Two Vegetarians, and it's how to cook for vegetarians at the same time as meat eaters, because I think it's a problem that a lot of families have, is how to feed what my mother delightfully calls me, the awkward squad, at the same time as the people who eat meat. But I started writing another cookbook, and I have, as a blogger, you make money from working with brands, and there comes a point where people give you contracts, and you're like, Christ, I don't even know what to do with this. And I actually ended up with a talent agent who manages all my business stuff. And through them, I got a literary agent because my talent agent said, do you write? And I'd signed with a very prestigious agency with Curtis Brown, who look after, you know, the Winston Churchill estate and John le Carré and people. So I was a bit like, well, yes, I'd love a literary agent. So it was slightly embarrassingly, I didn't have to look for one. I was kind of given a literary agent along with my talent agent. And they just held my hand, and we went through the whole business of getting cookbook deal. I was published by Quadrille, who are an amazing cookbook publishers. And I was very lucky, but I think it's because I had this blogging platform, and I think it is one of those things, as I'm sure the writers on this panel know, the thing you always get asked when you're trying to do a book deal is, how will you promote your book? What is your platform? Can you get a piece in X magazine? So having a blog meant I got a cookbook deal. I'm under absolutely no illusions. Clearly, I'm an amazing cook, according to my mother. But the book deal came about because I had a platform to promote it on. But it's been immensely rewarding because when you write a blog, people talk back to you, and they're not trolls generally. They're lovely people like you guys who tell you when your recipes do or don't work. And I've had people who read my book who've never used an avocado before. It's been a really amazing journey listening to how other people cook. It's actually the most exciting bit of all, is hearing other people's cooking stories and realising that most people can't cook, which is why I really believe that everyone can cook, but you just need to tell them very carefully how to do it.
Yes.
Which is why Mary Berry and Delia are so popular, because they hold your hands.
Yes, and non-judgmental as well, aren't they?
Yes.
Your ability or lack of ability in the kitchen. I mean, there's some great recipes in your book. You've got some, fantastic salads. You've got carby hangover food. There's a real mix. What do you think about this kind of dominance of clean eating at the moment? There's been in the papers, hasn't it, a lot?
I call it punishment food because most of it tastes like cardboard. Food doesn't have to taste like you're being punished when you eat it. And I have some amazing friends in the wellness space, really lovely, interesting, brilliant girls, but equally a lot of people in the wellness space who don't know how to cook. And if one more person writes a recipe for a lentil tomato stew that involves frying an onion for 5 minutes and cooking the tomatoes for 20 minutes, I'm going to scream. That will be disgusting. But the thing is, it would be a nice recipe if they only cooked the onions for 20 minutes and the tomatoes for 40 minutes. But you need to know how to cook to write those recipes. So I'm a bit fed up with people in that space who, because they can't cook, make revolting food that people think is going to do them good. You can do yourself good through food and make it delicious at the same time, just without pretending that honey's not sugar. I'd rather eat a tiny bit of one of my excellent brownies than one big one made with dates in it. I don't really see the point. I just think food is such a glorious pleasure. Most of us have got sort of mundane lives. I mean, I'm lucky. I do get to do some very shiny stuff. But a lot of the time, I'm at home with a tin of baked beans. It's not all kind of like shiny premieres and nice 5-star hotels. And I want my food to be the main pleasure in my life. So with wellness, surely it should just be about making yourself feel good through your food.
Yes, wellness is a word, isn't it? There's magazines now on wellness, aren't they? So it's kind of taking that idea, but taking it in the right space rather than...
But you can do it properly if you're informed. I spent a lovely afternoon with Liz Earle last week. She sold her beauty company in 2010, and it's actually now owned by Boots. She has nothing to do with the beauty, and she does a quarterly wellness magazine. But oh my God, that woman's informed. She knows the science. She knows all of the things. And I was expecting somewhat of a charlatan, and what I got was a woman who spends a lot of time talking to neuroscientists, physiologists, and doesn't publish a single thing in her quarterly wellness magazine that doesn't have hard science behind it. I sound like I'm plugging her mag, but I was just really impressed that someone within that space was actually taking the time to learn the science rather than telling us that agave syrup is going to heal all our ills.
Yes.
Which it won't, because it's full of fructose and it's really bad for you.
Oh, you know it. So I'm really interested to talk about your blogging. You definitely were an inspiration for me in starting Muddy Stilettos. I remember looking in the early days and thinking, bloggers, you can have a career in blogging. And we were just talking in the interval there, actually, and you were saying you don't have any problem with talking about the commercial side of blogging and how you make your money. Can you talk to me how you how that goes about? Obviously, you started a decade ago. How has blogging changed, and how do you make your money?
Well, it's been a slog. I mean, 11 years. I still get emails from people going, I've been blogging for 6 months, and I'm like, and I've got no readers. I'm like, 11 years, sweetheart. It takes a while. I did it anonymously because when I started, there was nowhere to have an opinion in a public space unless you're a columnist. So to put your opinion on a blog, to me, felt terrifying as a journalist. So I made it super duper anonymous. Stayed anonymous. I shut it down for a year. I went to the Wall Street Journal as fashion director to launch a magazine for them. And Rupert Murdoch doesn't really like his staff having opinions that aren't his, so didn't have a blog when I worked on the Wall Street Journal. Hated my job, failed at it miserably. As a sidebar, you can always admit when you failed at something, when you've become successful at something else. Hated my job in New York. And so I started my blog up again at the beginning of 2009. I sold everything I owned on eBay, put the rest in a tiny storage locker on the west side in Manhattan, and I flew to Los Angeles. I hired the shonkiest car you've ever seen, this Toyota, for $600 a month, and I went on the road, and I slept in the car, I slept in youth hostels, I stayed with people I met on Twitter, and I just had an adventure, and I wrote about it every day. And I didn't have very much money, and it started to get a bit tricky. And then it got a bit more tricky, and I had a really bad year in 2010 where I didn't know what I was going to do. I kept being offered book deals, but they were people who wanted me to write really terrible New York chick lit, like really, really, really bad, shopping and shagging novels of the worst possible caliber, because they thought as a fashion editor that's what I want to do. But I knew there was something in the blog, but no one was monetizing blogs back then at all. And then suddenly, it's like the world's view of blogging changed. And I got my first commercial job in 2010, working with Mercedes-Benz at London Fashion Week, running their Twitter feed. And at the same time, I was still anonymous. I got a call from a friend saying a broadsheet was trying to out me, because back then there weren't that many well-known bloggers. So people were much more interested. No one would care nowadays if a blogger gave up their anonymity, but it was a story then. So I rang up Grazia, and they very kindly colluded with me, and they did a big feature on me being me. Still, I find it utterly bizarre that even happened. And I suddenly started earning money. I signed with my agents, and within 6 months, I was the legs of Hunter Wellies. I shot the advertising campaign for Hunter. It was in Vogue. I always thought I'd be in Vogue, maybe, if I was lucky, as a writer, and it was my legs in a pair of wellies with a bicycle. It was the most surreal thing in the world. A bit like your friends. By the way, I was always the last to be picked at school at sport as well. That really resonated. So all my friends at school, I had like geeky glasses and in a corner reading a book the whole time. Seeing me in Vogue wearing a pair of wellies, believe me, I got some very strange comments from my school friends too. But I started earning a lot of money very quickly. And I found it astonishing, way more than I earned as a journalist. And within 18 months, we were turning over 6 figures. And I'm always very honest about the money side of the business, because I think as women, we should own our success. As I was saying to Harry, can you tell I used to live in New York? But I think we should be open. We should say what we achieve. We should talk about what we earn. It shouldn't be a pejorative thing to be successful, to say, yes, my business has made money, because I've done the sleeping in the car, and I've done the really shit times. And, I feel like it sort of came out the other side. The main income comes from partnering with brands. So they'll say to me, could you throw a dinner party and ask some interesting people that you know, and then maybe write about it on your blog, or will you develop a recipe for us? And maybe that'll be a recipe we put in a pamphlet that goes out in the supermarket. Or it might be, will you host an event? I'm doing something called Rémi Martin. Next month, I'm interviewing the chef Claude Bozy at the Bendon in front of 200 people about his career. So I do all sorts of completely random things. There's absolutely no connection to any of it. And I work with brands as varied as Nespresso to American Express. But the great thing about doing projects with those big, shiny brands is it means I can then write about the really small brands that I like who don't have any money at all, because blogs that are only 100% paid for are not very interesting. I want to be able to write about my rescue dog, and I want to be able to write my recipes. And the reason she's here tonight, in case you think it's a little bit weird, is that because she's a rescue, when she's left on her own, she wails like Scooby-Doo, to a degree like, oh! And so, and because she does the snoozing, I figured no one would mind if she came and sat on my lap.
Oh, she's so sweet.
She's an ambassador for Dogs Trust, so that's another thing that's been really great. My sister's got multiple sclerosis, and I moved back to England to help look after her as her carer. And the really fantastic thing about my job is that it comes with, the free lipsticks and the shiny shit. It's a technical term. And I can really, make my sister's life a lot more fun. And, we can do stuff with the Dogs Trust. We do a lot of fundraising for multiple sclerosis too. So the whole blogging thing has come with this insane raft of totally unexpected stuff, of which the cookbook was something I'd wanted to do for such a very long time. And I still sort of sit here like this. Just can't quite believe it. I'd like to say the cover is hideous, by the way. Just one of the things, as a sidebar about actual publishing, I don't know if you've had this in your contracts, but mine said, the publisher guarantees to take into consideration the author's opinion. Which basically meant I was allowed to say the first cover was terrible, and then they gave me this one, at which point I'd run out of options. The US cover's much nicer.
And can I ask you just a little bit about the social media side of things? Obviously, you've been in that for a very long time as well. Obviously, doing Twitter feeds probably before any of the rest of us really knew much about it. Where do you think social media is going? And I'm sure there's lots of people in the audience, who are on social media probably more than they think they should be, or certainly their children on more than they should be. Do you have any sort of great views on the social media or where it's going? Or
I mean, it is an insane time suck. There's no two ways about it. I mean, you do have to turn it off if you want to go and do proper work, I think. It's been very interesting for me because the blog was my primary platform. I'm a writer. I want to write. You have to have photographs on a blog to draw people in. We live in such a visual world. But for me, it's always been about the words. Of course, I loved Twitter. But then we have the rise of Instagram. And actually, I slightly resent Instagram now. I've got 50,000 odd followers on there. But it's actually quite small beer compared to a lot of my peer group. And I have to spend a huge amount of time curating that Instagram feed. I'd frankly rather spend having business meetings. I like being an entrepreneur. And I'd rather spend that time writing. So for me, as a business thing, I get quite frustrated by how people think Instagram is the big shiny thing. But because so many people buy their followers on Instagram, I don't like the inauthenticity of it. I don't like the fact that you can... I met a girl the other day who's got 340,000 followers on Instagram. She gets 3 comments on every post. You can't tell me she hasn't bought at least 339,000 of those followers. But she's getting money and jobs off the back of it. And so from within the industry, I find it very frustrating that the transparency that there used to be in my part of the world has disappeared completely. I'm quite unusual because I've always banged on a lot about the ethics of blogging. You'll never see me not disclose when I've been paid. It says this is a sponsored post really clearly, but I would never accept work with a brand that I didn't actually like or use myself. If I couldn't tell a compelling story with a personal angle, then I won't take the money and I won't do the job. But sadly, that's not really how my bit of the social media world is. It's all mainly about the money these days. It's not about telling the story. As to which platform, it's really difficult to know. I mean, Instagram has such a grasp on people's imaginations these days. Our short attention span means we like pretty pictures. But I also don't like the fact that we're then holding up people's imaginary lives and comparing ourselves to them.
Yeah.
And I find that hugely worrying. I don't put very many pictures of me online because I don't really want to go down that route of you can look like this, or this is how we all should look, because it's holding up something that's not really real. Because I'm not going to put a picture... I've got really bad rosacea. I'm probably quite pink now. I'm not going to put a picture of me up on rosacea looking like I've been slapped around the face. But if I put a picture of me, I'll have makeup on, but that's not the real me. I have a real problem with the lack of authenticity in social media these days, because I don't think it does any of us any good to watch other people's pretend perfect lives. But I'm a promulgator in a way of that as well. So it's a very difficult balancing act.
Oh, Sasha, it's been a pleasure. We're going to have to move on, otherwise you're going to be here till midnight. I think we've only got a licence till 10:30. But thank you so much, and we'll come and take some questions for Sasha at the end of the evening. Thank you so much.
So Clover, last but definitely not least, Clover Stroud wrote her beautifully moving memoir, The Wild Other, which she's got there, and it's about your mother's catastrophic horse riding accident, which shattered Clover's previously idyllic childhood, and it's about love and families and loss and adventure. And I read it with tears running down my face on the tube. It's an incredibly moving book, and you've lived an extraordinary life, which I'm sure you'll tell us a bit about, over all sort of different parts of the world. So do you want to just give us a little flavour of the book? Yes, please.
So there's a lot in the book which makes me cry, actually, sometimes I'm asked to do readings, and I've been in a reading where I've been kind of struggling through it, because it is very much a book about grief and the sort of journey of grief and what trauma does to a life, but it is also very, very much a book about living and loving and enjoying yourself and adventuring. And sort of taking yourself on the adventures that you can. So what I'm going to read to you is not a piece that makes me feel sad, but a piece that makes me feel something quite different, because it's about a cowboy when I was living in Texas, who I had a really lovely romance with. Shay smelt of tobacco and the green brush on the ranch land and cherry chapstick because it was so hot and windy out there, it killed your lips. I knew he smelt of all these things before he ever kissed me, as soon as he walked into the Crystal Bar where I sat drinking Bud Light with Cara. Shay wore a battered palm leaf cowboy hat with a band of sweat around the rim over his short, cropped brown hair, and he bore all of the openness of the ranch where he'd been working in with him. He knew Cara from way back, she later told me, so he sat with us, and when she stood up to start her shift behind the bar, he just moved his stool closer to mine. We talked without stopping, and he made me laugh, telling me about a cult he'd been breaking that morning who'd bucked him off 5 times in a row. He was open in a way that reminded me of my friends back home, and we didn't stop talking all evening. After midnight, when the bar had shut, we sat on the tailgate of his pickup outside, drinking cold bottles of beer that he'd bought from Cara, with his radio turned up loud, playing Patsy Cline numbers. He took my hand and pulled me out onto the tarmac, holding me close against his body as we danced under the moonlight, until he said, "Spend the night with me," and of course I did. Shay lived outside town, and after that I spent nights with him at his wooden house with a veranda running all the way round it, where he had lived alone with 2 dogs who slept on the porch. It was a rented house, and he broke broncs for a living, so had built a round pen for breaking and some wooden corrals where a dozen horses nodded in the shade of a big wooden barn. He could weld hollow pipe into fencing and fix his truck when it broke down. I would fall asleep pressed into his hot skin, but would wake alone, the window beyond the bed flung open to where I could see his figure in one of the pens on the back of a horse as he galloped it around and around to break it in. It was as if he knew when I was watching him, as he'd always look up, flashing that smile that was knowing and vulnerable at the same time. I stayed at his house more often than I stayed at the trailer on the ranch. He'd light a fire in the pit outside his house, cooking steaks we'd eat in the dark and the heat as the nights shifted onwards, country music playing on the radio in the kitchen window. One night, just to escape Alpine, we drove together into the mountains in his pickup until he parked up in the thick darkness with nothing around but the yellow dots of stars dizzying above us. We didn't sleep at all then, but we talked and drank until he pulled me towards him so that I knelt across his lap, and he pulled my skirt up, pushing me against the steering wheel. I felt like I was dissolving around myself, beyond the cab, but into the landscape, and on beyond that, into the bleeding dawn sky. Later, as the pale morning sunlight split the darkness and daylight arrived, he folded up his faded yellow Carhartt coat to make a pillow as I lay across his lap, and he put his hand in my hair. There was nothing to say because we were just existing for a perfect moment with our breathing and the morning arriving before it was time to drive back to the ranch. "Horses to jingle," he said, running his hand through my hair. "Come on, wake up, wild one." As we drove back, the truck cast broken shadows onto the mesquite bushes beyond the tracks, and Shay glanced across at me so I could almost touch his presence, even though he didn't say anything. When we got to the horse barns, there was a wild turkey feather lying beside the gate, and I thought, this is freedom like I've never known it.
Fantastic, thank you. So you obviously had your amazing time in Texas. You had a stint in Ireland, living with travellers and travelling with them, didn't you? You spent time in a war-torn corner of Russia, all sorts of things. So have you always been an adventure seeker, or was part of this sort of escaping a difficult home situation?
Well, I mean, that was definitely it. But as children, Mum had given us... I mean, I grew up in Oxfordshire, and I had a very sort of idyllic, very beautiful childhood, living in a big, quite rambling, quite bohemian house as the youngest of 5. And my parents, Mum moved from Oxford out to the country because she really wanted us to kind of have country life. And she put us onto ponies. And I think riding gives a child like an incredible sort of physical confidence and that sort of sense of independence of being able to ride away from your parents, basically, when you're quite young. So I think that she really loved us, and she made us all feel like we could kind of do the things that we wanted in life. So when I was 16, she went riding, as she often did, and she fell off her horse, and she was then in a coma for 3 months. And when she woke up, she had profound brain damage, and she couldn't walk or talk or look after herself. So at the age of 16, this very idyllic, very beautiful life, really, was, it was completely and utterly shattered and completely altered. And I think that kind of, because I was 16, it was such a formative moment. And I think it kind of wove into my adult DNA, really. And that sort of need to go after the adventure and need to take yourself to the limit. I mean, what happened to my mum was very extreme, because she also existed in this incredibly brain damaged state for 22 years until she died in 2013. So she was sort of suspended in this state of life and death, or death in life. And we were in this kind of weird hinterland of kind of grief and trauma, where you can't go into the grief properly, but you are living through it. So I was always on the run, and I was always kind of looking for her. And I think the fact that something so difficult and traumatic had happened at that moment, it meant that going off to, I took myself off on holiday to a war zone, and that seemed very, very normal in my mid-30s. I think that, kind of conflict and problems and difficulty felt like a familiar place to go towards.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, when you're writing about your own life, there's no plot lines, there's no characters to sort of hide behind. How do you feel about putting, everything out there for people to pore over? Do you ever worry about oversharing? Do you ever get in trouble with the people around you? Where do you draw the line?
I love sharing, and I'm probably the least private person that you could meet. And one of the really lovely things, I'd been a journalist before I wrote the book, so I'd done quite a lot of confessional journalism, and I'd written about some of the things that happened in the book, and I'd written about mum, and I was married to an alcoholic in my 20s, so I had kind of experimented in a way with putting myself out there and what it felt like. And one of the things that is very gratifying when you write like that is that you get people responding, and because of social media, and actually sometimes the comment section on papers can be really useful, that you get people wanting to talk to you about things that have gone on or events that have gone on. And so I also knew that in the writing I wanted to, what had happened to Mum was, it wasn't a moderate thing. It wasn't even, in a way, death would have been easier, it would have been more moderate, it would have been something that kind of ended. It was this sort of very, very elongated time that was very difficult to understand. So in my writing, I felt like I wanted to take myself to the extreme place. I couldn't write about it in a moderate way. And I also felt like I kind of owed readers, if you're going to buy the book or come to events and be so kind, really, as to read the book, then I owed it to people that I was absolutely honest about things that had gone on. And also it's exciting. It's quite exciting because it's quite a nerve-wracking thing to do. Yeah. And yeah, in terms of the people around me, my siblings they read the proof when it was finished. But we all have kind of, we're the kind of family who don't really, we probably tell each other what to do and then all completely ignore, what each other says. So yeah. I was going to do it anyway.
And I imagine your book was quite helpful to other people experiencing grief. Did you get any, what kind of feedback did you get from people?
Well, because grief is a big theme in it, and because grief is such a hugely universal and kind of uniting experience, I mean, I can absolutely guarantee that probably everybody, at some point everybody in this room will experience what it's like to feel grief-struck, and that's been really, really wonderful. Actually, people coming up and saying, whether it's it's because I read your book and my mother died when I was a child, or I write very, very frankly about postnatal depression, which I've had several times, and that's been something that people have really, really wanted to share as well. And I feel hugely privileged to be in a position where I can talk to other people about that, and it's definitely what I'm trying to do in my writing. I think is to communicate the most kind of acute and most difficult and also joyful human emotion and what it means to be a human being. That's what I think I'm trying to kind of explore.
And as we mentioned earlier, you have 5 children. How on earth do you get any writing done?
It is really difficult. I mean, actually, I have to say, when you have your first baby and then you have, if you have a second one, that jump from 1 to 2 is suddenly, you know, it's not like it just doubles. It kind of creates a whole volume of new chaos. And when you go from 4 to 5, I definitely underestimated the level of kind of madness of having, and my oldest child is 17 and my youngest is 1. So we're dealing with like teething at one end and, you know, drug abuse at the other, basically. And it's kind of wraparound parenting, definitely.
Yeah, and I've seen pictures on your Instagram feed with various babies and then a Shetland pony wandering into the kitchen.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I definitely, my mum was definitely, it's no coincidence, I think, that I've had 5 kids. I'm one of 5 kids.
Yeah.
I've kind of ended up, I'm not ended up, I'm only in the middle of my life, I hope, but the sort of, that kind of feeling of wanting to sort of feel something of the past in the present as well is something I do with my parenting, I guess, because I am bringing the kids up, the younger kids certainly, in a kind of similar environment to the one that I grew up in.
Have you ever been tempted to write a parenting book? And that's a huge genre, isn't it? There's so many books about parenting.
Yeah, no, it's massive, and it's massive at the moment as well. But I mean, actually, it's funny that you say that, because it is something that I'm kind of trying to working with at the moment, and I'm really, really interested in trying to work out how I can put my voice with the voices of, you know, other women and lots of different women's experiences, because I think parenting is, you know, being a mother is so difficult and is so, you know, it takes you on a kind of, the peaks and troughs in a single day as a parent are quite hard to come to terms with in a way.
Do you ever meet any other women with 5 children? It's quite unusual these days.
It is quite unusual,
Do you have a support group with the other...
On Instagram, you know, you do sometimes see it on Instagram. I did meet somebody the other day who had 7, and we were at this party, this quite kind of full-on party, and she had a newborn baby, and she was like the last person to leave, and I thought she was pretty amazing, actually.
That is impressive. And what's next for you? What's your next adventure? I mean, has motherhood sort of clipped your wings in terms of travelling? Or?
Well, obviously it has to a bit. It absolutely has to. And in my 20s, I did lots of travel journalism and travelling around the world and, you know, writing about swanky hotels and things. And it was fun. It was fantastic. In fact, I started doing it after I'd just got divorced from my first husband. So I had 2 very, very young children. And I was doing journalism, and I was making just enough to support us. But then I get sent off and, you know, to go and stay in these incredible hotels. And it was quite a kind of crazy life, really, of being a single mother and then staying in amazing places. And it was great fun, and it was a source of big adventure. And it was how I sort of funded. I had a whole period where I had a kind of romance with this Russian guy who I met. My sister's got a circus called Gifford Circus, which some of you probably know, because it's very much a local circus. And it was in my 20s when I had just got divorced, and Nell said, "Oh, do you want to come and run a backstage cafe for the circus?" And I got a column in the Telegraph writing about it. And she'd bought from Ossetia this Cossack troupe over from Russia. And so I was backstage with my 2 very young children in a newly divorced and very, very chaotic life. I was about 28. And there was this very, very sexy guy galloping around on the back of a horse, kind of dressed in furs and leathers and shouting in Russian and pulling me into his caravan to drink more shots of vodka. So it was quite inevitable, really, that I would have a romance with him. And the journalism was a way of funding trips to go and see him, until editors were saying, like, "We've had enough pieces on Russia. We don't want to hear about your experience in Russia
about your
anymore."
boyfriend.
Yeah.
But any more books? And we talked briefly about parenting, possibly a parenting book. Is there anything else in the pipeline?
Well, that's the thing that I'm working on at the moment, basically,
Okay.
and that's what I kind of want to see if I can. I mean, at the moment, I had when I finished this book, then Lester was born just immediately afterwards, my youngest. And so I think there is that moment where you do kind of need to finish the book and then have a bit of a kind of breathing space as well. And with a very small baby, you know what it's like trying to kind of have a coherent thought as well. Can be quite difficult. It's hard, isn't
Definitely.
it?
But also, I mean, I've worked with and known writers all my professional life, and almost all of them now say that it focuses you like nothing else.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
when you've got all day, like I spent 10, 15 years, the house to myself all day, nothing to do. And you sort of end up creating ridiculous housework tasks to let your brain have that percolation time before you write. And I could kind of see how with motherhood, like, it takes twice as long to hang out laundry because everything's so tiny and it slips between the things and like feeding a baby and all of that stuff. It does give you all of that brain distilling time.
Yes,
But
definitely.
I can see when you have something to write, the time you've got like 1/1,000,000th of the time
A
at
very,
your
very
laptop,
short-
but you've
short
had a lot of
period.
processing time. I can see how that works for people.
It's also very sustaining, actually, when you are doing those quite kind of monotonous things of cooking pasta or the school run or hanging out with little tiny baby grows, to have a creative project which is there.
I can.
And at the moment, this sort of I want to write about motherhood and sex, basically, and female sexuality and what happens to you as a woman when you have kids, and what kind of happens to your sort of sense of identity, and to write it in this very, very confessional and very open way that this book is written in, and get other women in there as well.
Lovely. We'll watch this space. Thank you so much, Clover.
Thanks.
Can you do that? Are there any? We do have a little bit of time if anybody would like to ask a question from the floor. Yes.
A question to the memoirs. I'm curious to know where you get your insights from when you're writing. Do you get them as you're writing, or do you do any form of counselling or therapy that gives you some distance to your experience in order that you can kind of not just tell the story but share what you learn from it too?
I've definitely had plenty of therapy, definitely, which is really, really helpful. But I did find that, as I was writing it, I was having kind of realizations about my life that hadn't been there before. And it had, so creatively and emotionally, it was a very, very useful process. And the epilogue of the book actually is a bit of writing which I'm most pleased about. I had no idea that I was going to write about it. I thought the book was going to end basically when my mum dies, but something comes out afterwards, which was my kind of understanding about what I was doing, going off on these quite self-destructive adventures. So I think that it was it took about 9 months to write the book. I think it was kind of having sifted through a lot of stuff and processed a lot of stuff that it came out. It certainly came out in the writing, and having that time to kind of sit for a long kind of quiet time with yourself and with memory, I think acted as a filter. But also, I mean, therapy is and I write about my therapist in the book actually as well. So that is a key part of it, certainly. But what about you?
When I wrote Running Like a Girl, I hadn't had really any therapy, and I'd sort of done all of the running when it came to write the book, so it sort of it existed, it had happened. But I caught up with myself with writing Leap In. The deadline and the IVF deadlines were sort of coming to meet each other, and I did have to sort of write my way out of that. And I know I've talked to lots of other authors who've written memoirs who've, instead of having any sort of counselling, have written a book. Because the temptation is to go, this is the truth, this is the version I like, I'm going to sell it and make some money from it, and I've put a full stop at the end, and so that must be the end of the story, and everything that happened here happened, and then they realise they have to kind of come to events like this for 2 years, and quite often people end up a complete nervous wreck because the story carries on. Obviously you carry on living beyond that final chapter. I mean, obviously, clearly in my case, I've slightly undermined my own powerful book about infertility. But it is, I did have some counselling, but not specifically about the things at the time that I was writing. But I would recommend it to everyone who's going to do memoir, specifically in order to clarify what you wanted to do as a writer and what you wanted to do as a human who wanted to be happy, or at least at one with oneself. Because, yeah, it's a dangerous trap, I think, to fall into. Anybody else?
You've answered all questions.
Wordy women.
If if anyone's got anything they don't want to share with the class, which is understandable, do come and talk to the authors at the end, won't you? You know, if you do have a burning question.
And in the meantime, can we give a very large round of applause to all of these authors for being immensely brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you. I hope you all had a... Ooh! Somebody Stiletoes, there it goes. That's my call. Yeah, thank you so much for coming, and I hope you've had a